We'll be starting in just a moment. Want to ensure we can have everyone enter the webinar. Thank you. We're going to start in just a moment. For those of you joining us, let us know where you're joining us from. We'll get started. Greetings and welcome to the December 2025 National University Speaker Series. My name is Dr. Nancy Rowland Heinrich, and I have the honor of serving as the Executive Vice President of Community Engagement for National University. I am proud to be the founder and host of our NU Speaker Series, and since the inception of the Speaker Series in July 2020, we have held over 50 episodes with just an amazing group of presenters on a wide variety of subjects. We're very excited about tonight's topic. Please note that our past webinars have been recorded and you can listen to any of the prior episodes, and we will post a link in the chat so you can do that. Again, tonight's episode will be recorded and you will be able to listen to that at a later time. But we truly appreciate all of you that are joining us, whether it's your first time joining us for an NU Speaker Series or whether you've attended many of our past events. In our audience, we certainly want to welcome any alumni, current students, faculty, staff, and the many community members who follow our series. National University prides itself on being in and of the community, and we appreciate our virtual audience joining us from throughout the country. We hope this next hour will be time well spent and you'll learn a lot about our programs. Let me take a moment to share a few things about National University. We were founded in 1971 by a retired U.S. Navy captain, Dr. David Chigos. Last month, we celebrated our 54th anniversary, and the university has a rich history of providing accessible and relevant higher education programs to meet the needs of non-traditional working and military students. NU currently serves more than 50,000 academic students, more than 80,000 non-academic students and our academic students are enrolled in more than 125 different degree programs. Last Saturday, we had our mid-year grad walk, and we were pleased to welcome nearly 700 new alumni. And the new alumni will be joining an impressive global network of more than 250,000 graduates, including some very distinguished alumni. But it is now time to introduce today's topic, our moderator, and panelists. So regardless of what field you work in, I hope you will find today's topic of interest as we explore transformative power of healthy relationships in learning, home, and in the workplace. And at this time, I would like to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Nick Yoder. Nick serves as the Associate Vice President of Whole Human Education and Research for the Harmony Academy at National University. Dr. Yoder has more than 2 decades in higher education, and his expertise is in integrating social, emotional, and academic development into education policy and practice, and has been pivotal in his research, which has been focused on improving educational outcomes. Audience, I hope you enjoy today's presentation on transformative power of healthy relationships in learning, home, and the workplace. I will turn it over to Nick, and he will set the stage for the topic and introduce our panelists. Nick, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Nancy. And thank you all for coming and joining us today to talk about the transformative power of healthy relationships in learning, home, and the workplace. This presentation and webinar and our panelists is really grounded in the Harmony Academy, which is a part of National University. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Harmony Academy is and the evidence that we have that's going to ground our discussion today, and then bring on the panelists to have a fantastic conversation. So if you aren't familiar with Harmony, we are part of National University since 2014, and we're really grounded in the idea to support well-being, foster healthy relationships, and really unlock the potential of every learner. So we're really centered on this idea that just because we're in space with one another does not mean we necessarily form social harmony with one another, does not necessarily form community with one another, but it's really about those intentional processes, that intentional skills that we develop that really kind of supports all learners, both little kids all the way up to our adults. And what we really try to focus on is who we serve, is we really try and serve the whole community. So we started in 2014 with schools. Ever since then, we've kind of expanded our reach to out-of-school time providers and families and caregivers. And at the end of the webinar today, we actually have a nice gift for you that you get to use some of our work with your families at home. And you can go to the next slide. So one of the things that I think is really important of what we think about when we're forming healthy relationships is twofold. One is we kind of need these intentional practices that we need to support and develop. So Harmony has really created and developed a series of everyday practices that you can use to form those relationships, whether it's in small group, whether it's in a larger group, whether it's with yourself, right? Because the whole idea is that you're forming relationship with self, relationship with others, and relationship with community in order to really kind of form those harmonious relationships broadly. Not only do we need these intentional practices that we do every day, but we also kind of need some explicit skill instruction. We need to develop core social and personal skills, core relationship skills, and some people call them durable skills, to really kind of support our work moving forward. So at Harmony, we really kind of ground ourselves on first really thinking about who we are, like being our best self, who we are as individuals, right? How do we know and understand our emotions? What's our growth mindset? Do we use helpful self-talk, right? Do we know how to advocate for ourselves? Then we kind of move into more of those interpersonal skills, really thinking about empathy, compassion, communication, and interpersonal problem solving. So really thinking about kind of that blend of those really critical skills that we need to form those healthy relationships. You go to the next slide. So, so I just wanted to also mention kind of our scale of who we've reached and impacted. So throughout our work over the past decade at Harmony, we've reached more than 70,000 schools and organizations. We've impacted more than 33 million kids across the globe because we've been in all 50 states, over 88 countries, and really working with 500,000 educators who have accessed our portal in the past, at least 5 years that we've had our portal open. We also worked with a number of other premier organizations with U.S. Soccer Foundation, the National Head Start, YMCA. We've been awarded a U.S. Department of Education Innovation Research grant, and we work with some of the largest districts in the country: New York City, Los Angeles, Clark County, Chicago Public Schools. So we really have that breadth. And you can go to the next slide. And part of that breadth is really about having that evidence, right? Are we making an impact on our work? And so we know over our decade of work with kiddos across the country, with educators across the globe, that when kids are intentional about engaging in purposeful interactions, when they really learn the skills, they improve their academics, they enjoy school more, they connect with class, they interact with more peers, and it addresses their problem behaviors, right? And so one of the things that we're really moving for as we kind of continue to think about our innovation, our research, is how does that then also impact the adults, the teachers, the families, the parents, the out-of-school time providers, the workforce. So as we continue to engage in this work, we're super excited to partner with you all, with the alumni, with students at National University to continue moving this work forward. So with that, you can go to the next slide. I'm super excited to introduce my panelists today. I enjoy each one of these, both personally as well as professionally. They're outstanding rock stars who have really thought about relationships as foundations for thriving schools, workplaces, communities. And they really kind of really center and engage with multiple places in organizations. So I'm really excited to first introduce Terrell Strayhorn, who is the president and CEO of Do Good Work Consulting Group. When I call your name, if you want to come on screen. So Dr. Terrell Strayhorn is an internationally recognized scholar on student success, acclaimed speaker, and award-winning author of 15 books and over 200 publications. He has delivered thousands of talks at more than 3,000 institutions and conferences worldwide, with research supported by $10 million in funding. Known as the Professor of Belonging, Strayhorn hosts Do Good Work podcasts, leads Belonging Matters blog and Psychology Today, and co-edits the Belonging Journal by Sage. We also have Brandon Cardet-Hernandez, who is the founder and CEO of Medley Learning. With over 20 years of experience in education and public policy, Brandon is a transformative leader dedicated to closing achievement gaps and opportunity gaps. As the founder and CEO of Medley Learning, he is building adaptive, research-backed digital tools that expand access and accelerate learning for multilingual learners and students with disabilities. And last but not least, we have Denise Diaz, who's a strategic partner for Harmony Academy at National University. She is with 29 years of service in Clark County School District. Denise is an experienced educational leader, skilled in developing family engagement, community partnerships, and systems that support student and family success. Denise now leads strategic partnerships for Harmony Academies at National University, cultivating multi-year collaborations with districts and organizations nationwide. So one, welcome. This is esteemed panel. We're super excited to have you, and I'm very excited to have a conversation with you about the science of belonging and ways in which we form meaningful relationships with others across the various contexts, including school, work, and home. So I really want to start off with the science of belonging, right? And what do we actually mean when we're talking about belonging? So Terrell, as the professor of belonging, I'm going to start with you. If you could talk with us about what are healthy relationships, why are they foundational to thriving communities, workplaces, and schools, and what are the core components that form that foundation?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Nick, for convening all of us, and to Amanda, the entire National University Harmony Academy team, to all of my fellow panelists. Looking forward to the conversation. What a great question. So, we do talk a lot about healthy relationships as being foundational to thriving communities and workplaces and schools, primarily as a sort of core component of belonging. First thing we're going to talk about, hopefully, is the fact that sense of belonging. Belonging is a feeling. It's a feeling, therefore it can't be forced, can't be rushed. It's got to be nurtured, facilitated. It takes time, intentionality. And some of the core components that really form the foundation of those healthy relationships are things like relational connections, where as humans, whether we're at home, at work, or school, we really have to move from transactional to more relational kinds of connections. We often make or mistake contact for connection. And a healthy foundation really requires shifting from these transactional interactions, which focus on completion, protocols, efficiency, or task, to more relational interactions that prioritize connection, care, trust, and relationship. And when we view students or employees merely as numbers to be processed or to be enrolled or to be produced or graduated, that's that transactional mindset. We really erode the foundation of community. But when we view people as to be cared for, we actually build it. I think the second core component is around mattering. At the core of healthy relationships is mattering. Mattering is correlated positively and strongly with belonging. And this isn't just a buzzword, it's a psychological construct that has very specific components to it. People need to feel that they matter. That is, that they command people's attention, they are noticed, that they are important, they're an object of concern, that people need them or depend on them, and that there's someone in their corner sharing in their successes as well as their failures. That's what we call ego extension. And then a lot of what I've done in belonging research shows that belonging is a basic need, just as fundamental as our safety and security needs. So one of those core components around those healthy relationships has to do with safety and security. You cannot build healthy relationships on shaky ground. Psychological and physical safety become prerequisites for belonging. So if a person feels threatened, whether that's by discrimination, harassment, or some sort of stereotype threat, they regress to survival mode. And that makes forming healthy relationships virtually impossible. And higher order connections really are essential or require that kind of safety and security. But it's not just physical safety and security, it's also emotional, spiritual, and psychological safety. So we have to stop confusing fitting in with belonging. Fitting in is when changing myself or who I am to be accepted by the crowd. True belonging is the result of healthy relationship that accepts the student or the employee just the way they are.
Wow. Thanks so much, Terrell, for kind of really grounding us in what belonging is. Brandon, so National University's alumni are diverse in age, experience, etc. And so many of our alumni navigate work, family, community simultaneously. What role do healthy relationships play in sustaining that complexity? And how can leaders better support people whose lives don't fit traditional pathways?
Yeah, one, I'm going to echo Terrell and just say thank you for having me. And I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with such a thoughtful, caring group of leaders. So thank you again. For me, I think it's important to start with belonging is not a perk, it's a stabilizer in complex lives. And so most people don't live an orderly, linear life, especially adult learners. They're parenting, they're caregiving, they're working full time, they're going to school, they're navigating systems, often systems that weren't built for them. And so healthy relationships become the scaffolding that holds all those pieces together. Someone who understands your context, someone who sees your effort, someone who shows up consistently. So when leaders design systems around an idealized learner or worker, we unintentionally push out the very people we say we want to support. So leaders can support people with complex lives, which I think is the majority of us in any context, by doing a few things. And I think there's three that I really hold close. One, it's normalizing flexibility rather than treating it as an exception. We've got to create places of flexibility. It's part of the design of the system we build. It's creating predictable communication and trust building routines. So that consistently lowers the cognitive load that people take on. I know when we're communicating, I know how we're communicating. And in that relationship, I'm building trust so that you can be vulnerable, we can be together in it. And then I think there's this third piece, which is about designing for dignity. So it's seeing the adult learner not as a problem to solve, or seeing any employee not as a problem to solve, but as someone whose experience enriches the community. And if we start looking through a lens of value add, we're actually going to get the most out of people. We're going to build a culture of belonging. And I think belonging, to echo Terrell, is ultimately about being seen without having to shrink or simplify your life to fit in the institution. And so if we want to create a space of belonging, a culture of belonging in our workplace, that's how we're designing. We're designing so that people don't feel like they're shrinking. We're adapting to the community we have.
Thank you so much. So, Denise, two of the things that I've heard Brandon and Terrell say, one is belonging is not just a nice to have, but it's like a must, right? And then two, that there's system structures, culture that we need to put in place in order to do that. Can you talk a little bit about your work in CCSD and kind of the systems that you put in place to make belonging not just a nice to have, but an actual system-wide practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I echo my fellow panelists in the importance of this topic. Really and truly, it has to be systemic. Belonging becomes systemic when we build it into the district's structures and it's not left to chance. It's not an add-on, it's not an extra, but it's something that we do with intentionality. And we have to be able to listen, because I think oftentimes we make assumptions about what our staff or our students or our families or our stakeholders need versus actually listening to what it is they need, because that's where lies the problem, is making those assumptions. So really having a clear path and a clear vision with the buy-in in the structure that is wraparound. So, making sure that it is in your leadership conversations, it's in your school improvement plans, it's in your professional learning. It's something that is cultured into the district in every way. I think we often think that recognizing an employee is a standard. I'm going to recognize the employees. I'm going to send them a certificate for A, B, and C. But what do the staff really want to be recognized for, and in what way? Because again, good intentions potentially can fall upon deaf ears because it isn't truly what's wanted. So I think it's important to really listen and have a good pulse on the community that you're trying to establish a place of belonging for.
Great. Thank you so much. And I mean, you guys are speaking, my language, right, about the importance of relationships. And I kind of want to move that conversation now to really focus on like workplace belonging. So at Harmony, as you sort of heard that I talk about at the beginning, we're really focused in the in-school space with little young kids, but it's not just for young kids, right? Oftentimes we as adults think that like skill development or that intentional sense of relationship building only happens with like little kids or early childhood, but it really happens throughout our lives, right? And it really is central to how we feel at work and how we engage at work. So, Brandon, I want to start with you. With the rise of digital and hybrid learning and work environments, how do we build these cultures where people feel seen, they feel supported, they feel connected, even when the room, quote unquote, is virtual?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think it's really important that we're thinking about this as so many of us move to virtual or hybrid workplaces. Digital spaces require an even greater intentionality because belonging doesn't happen accidentally. And I think it's also important to say, to just be honest with one another, virtual spaces have a tendency to flatten people. Cameras come off, we are muted, we're not interrupting each other right now. Sometimes we're multitasking. And if you're not intentional, people begin to disappear in virtual spaces. And so I think there's a few things. In digital spaces, leaders almost have to over-index on clarity and connection. So clear expectations. So remove ambiguity, create psychological safety. What's the expectation when we're here? Do we have different backgrounds? Should we have our phones away? Should we close our screens? All the stuff. Just like set the norms so that everyone's not mad at each other when they leave the room. Small rituals, right? Check-ins, quick temperature polls, gratitude moments, rehumanize the space with a ritual and routine when you come together. There's structured collaboration. So I've watched virtual rooms where it's just like one person's leading and then everyone leaves and goes away and is supposed to do their own thing. Structured collaborations about breakout rooms with prompts, collaborative documents where we're working on it together. Create connection through doing, not just talking. And I think hybrid environments, rather, you must, the consistency within it is one of the most important things. So people feel a sense of belonging when they know what to expect and feel that their time and contributions matter. And so technology should be scaling access, not distance from each other. And the challenge to lead with that human relationship first requires design intentionality. And so that's what we have to bring to the room, not wait for it to be brought to us.
Thanks, Brandon. And Denise, can you talk a little bit about how you've done this work intentionally in Clark County with your staff? Like you've led multiple family engagement centers across the district, right? So you had multiple buildings that you were forming relationships in. So how did you help the staff feel both connected in their spaces, but then as a community that's a little bit larger than them as well?
Yeah. So we provided wellness opportunities, honestly, and really supporting people as humans first, before whatever their role is in our structure. Because I think that we're going to talk about human connection and belonging, but if we don't create that culture and we don't create those spaces, then we're not modeling what we want the outcome to be. So really looking at what it is that they need and elevating their stories, highlighting that real impact, and prioritizing their mental health and how they're doing. The pulse check, as Brendan mentioned, making sure that we are actively checking in on our staff members and seeing where I can give an opportunity for growth. Find those bright spots, find that person that really just needs that extra push. We all need encouragement. It doesn't matter what, rock stars, people may say we are, we can get pretty down on ourselves at times. And so the importance of building up your teams and providing them that space to feel safe, to take risks and grow themselves has been really important. In our family engagement centers, we have facilitators of learning. They're not licensed teachers. They are very educated and amazing individuals that are supporting our families, and they are doing the facilitating of learning. And with that has come a lot of us supporting them in how do they want to grow professionally, not how I think they should grow professionally, but how do you want to grow professionally and how can I help you get there? Because we should be the creator of people and we need to encourage our own to grow. So really, I think it's safe spaces, the opportunity to take risks, knowing that they can count on you, creates that loyalty and trust. And at the end of the day, I say it all the time, the bottom line is it comes down to relationships.
Great. Thank you so much, Denise. And Terrell, coming back to you, right? I know your work spans classrooms, families, professional work environments. How does this science of belonging translate across these contexts? And are there any universal drivers of belonging across these settings?
Absolutely. And I mean, so much of what we've already talked about starts to really point to this. I mean, belonging is a basic human need. Everybody wants to belong, whether at home, at work, or school. So the science of belonging is clear that, as you said earlier, it's not just nice to have, it's not optional, it's a fundamental need, as vital to our existence as air, water, food, shelter, sleep, safety, security, right? So often times we'll realize like students, employees, we rush to school or rush to work. And what makes it worth going to is the possibility, the idea that there I can make a contribution. I can be part of something
Mm,
larger than myself. I can connect with people who are different from myself and make friends. So all of these become fundamental motives. And whether you are an adult learner with a learning disability, a student veteran who's transitioning back to college, or a professional who's working in a workplace. And as Brandon mentioned, even if it's virtual, the drive to belong is a universal motivation. Sufficient to sort of dictate our behavior. It is why people apply for the job. It is why people show up every single day. It's why people, have decided, some of them, to sort of go back into the workplace, even post the pandemic. It has very little usually to do with people's chairs and the lighting in their office. It has to do with the people that make the place magic. I think that's a really important pull from the science of belonging, is how essential this is to human functioning. The second is one of those sort of universal drivers of it that fits across all of those settings, this idea about its need, focus, expressed and latent need, kind of dependent. In every single context, we as humans have expressed needs, things that we know we require, like paycheck or syllabus or some assistance, a map. And we have latent needs, desires that we can't articulate, like our need for validation and affirmation, and even sometimes friendship. Those universal drivers of belonging really involve anticipating and meeting those latent needs. We're trying to create environments at home, at work, and at school where people feel seen, heard, um, validated and valued, right? So that in a workplace, it means I'm going to experiment. I'm willing to innovate. I'm willing to think outside the box. Why? Because I know that one, creativity and innovation is valued here. And if I mess up, if I make a mistake or I stutter or I say something that a project doesn't hit the bottom line the way I intended, I won't be judged as stupid or silly or not cut out for the work, because that's the kind of environment that we've created. The same is true in work. I mean, in schools, where students will ask questions and they'll guess and they'll dream because they know that, one, even if I make a mistake or I offer something that's half baked, my teacher will value my contribution. Lastly, is around this whole context dependent part. Belonging is a basic need. Everybody wants it. It's context dependent, but universally felt. That is,
Mm.
while the feeling of belonging is universal, what it takes for me to feel it won't be the same thing that matters for you. The conditions that we must create change based on who I am and the setting. In the classroom, belonging might look different. It's a high five. It's a teacher who's engaging students in
Mm.
organized instruction that draws upon their lived experience. It's when the teacher draws on the music that's coming from a Latinx student's background, or somehow talks about an application of a math equation to something that really resonates with the student's interest,
Mm.
or when a teacher uses the quick connect cards that Harmony furnishes to learn how to connect with students quickly, to get them just thinking outside their head and getting to know their name. Those kinds of things can be really micro actions that have macro impact on students. But in a family or a work setting, belonging can look different. It's the teams that we form. It's the reward structures that we set up that recognize people and their contributions. It's the support that we as employees provide for people to get their job done. I've said this on social media just today. Belonging is a basic need, um, but it's got to be a priority, not a tagline, not a trend, but a real strategy that drives what we're doing, whether in school or workplaces.
So I love that. And I think one of the things that I'm like really hearing, the continued focus is on the intentionality piece of it. And how are we really creating like those systems and support for our youth, for our families, for our workers, for our staff, for our colleagues in that. And I think one of the things that I kind of want to move, well, one, I want to remind people, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A, because there'll be a Q&A piece in like 10 minutes. So pop it in there so you get your questions asked. But I think then it takes like intentional leadership, right? From leaders, right? And a leader doesn't have to be a hierarchical thing. Like we're all leaders in our respective spaces in the work that we do. And at Harmony, that's one of the things that we really try and do is build leaders and teachers and students and families and out of schools time staff. And how are they building those communities and see themselves as advocates for themselves and for others? So, Terrell, I kind of want to start again with you with this leadership question. Is people often assume that healthy relationships they'll require like these grand gestures, right? But they don't. So, what does the current research tell us about everyday actions and how we lead and engage with others in kind of not necessarily grand gestures, but kind of everyday actions?
Great question. And, just had this 4-part series with National and Harmony Academy. Brandon was a part of that. Dr. Ruby, several folks came through that. But we had our last session December 2nd with Doug Fisher. And in that session, which if you didn't watch, go find it online and, watch it. Thank us later. But, Doug said something that was really affirming for me as a belonging scholar as well. And he said in his research, he's also discovered how important knowing students' names can be for belonging. And I've said that a billion times, a billion different places, and people will often say, like, come on, you did all this research, you got all of these beta weights and coefficients in your stats, and the best recommendation you can give me is knowing someone's name. But if you've ever come into a Zoom room or into an office and someone had your name misspelled or they called you by the wrong name, you remember that feeling. It's so isolating. It's alienating, and especially when you think the person who said it should know you. Imagine it's your teacher. Imagine it's your supervisor. Imagine it's your partner. All those nods in the black church mean I'm preaching. All right. So what I'm saying is these are some very simple things that people can do. One, knowing people's names. Two, checking in on people. And this is something I've watched actually in my collaborations with Harmony. It could be as simple as there's a practice that I know, Nick, you're very familiar with, where your team will start off meetings saying, hey, where are you registering or coming into the meeting on a scale of 1 to 5? And people who are feeling good, hey, I'm on fire, I'm hitting my targets, I'm feeling good about the day, you're a 5. People who are feeling up under the work might register as a 1 or 2. The follow up to that, to follow and check up on those who are 2 and 1 and 3, reflects the kind of care that is essential for building healthy relationships. So it doesn't always have to be a pep rally, a big old, production, there are smaller actions. So the power of micro actions and affirmations in my research really show true. It's not always galas and grand ceremonies. It can be the small moments. It's when an instructor, like I said, learns a student name and how to pronounce it correctly. It's when an advisor or supervisor sends a just checking in email during a moment of ordinary work. It's when a supervisor shouts out an employee on LinkedIn and tags them, as one of my participants in a study shared. These small everyday actions signal to individuals that you're not invisible. I see you and I'm paying attention to your contribution. It's also, and I think Brandon and others, Denise may have mentioned this in this session, that one, as we start thinking about how we can foster belonging, um, it's hard to feel like you belong when you're confused, when you're lost, when you're unsure. So when we can reduce uncertainty through responsiveness, responding to the email, offering instructions, and onboarding that's a properly built and executed. Again, grand gestures are not necessary, but we can create initiatives like helplines and other kinds of support mechanisms that will help reduce anxiety and signal to a person someone anticipated that I might have this question and they care enough to provide those answers for me. And I said earlier, and I know this one was definitely Denise, that a lot of people think about belonging as being like a high five and a hug and a kiss, whatever. Some of those things matter. Certain days, students do need to know that someone cares about them. And it is pausing in the hallway and checking in on them, or even at work, listening to someone who's going through a divorce and thinking about how it's impacting their work and their productivity. But it's also about structural kinds of changes so that it's not one-on-one always, but how are we making sure that everyone benefits from this safety net, that everyone gets a proper onboarding, that everyone has access to technologies that make their work more efficient, that everyone knows who to go to when they have questions or who to reach out to when they're facing crisis. We often think we need to move mountains to help people belong, but the research, at least mine, shows we just need to move the obstacles, not mountains. It's not the grand gestures that save people. It's the everyday consistency of saying, I see you, I hear you, and you matter.
Thanks, Terrell. That's so impactful. And Brandon, I'm going to turn to you, right? Because you've led in multiple different sectors, like in schools and government, and now, as the CEO of a new company. So I'm really curious, what leadership practices have you used consistently to create that sense of belonging for people from diverse backgrounds, especially, the adult learners balancing multiple identities and responsibilities?
Yeah, I think what Terrell said is magic. We sometimes think belonging is going to happen through grand gestures, strategies that are huge. It's actually in the little things every day. There's three things I hold really tight. One is predictability, clear expectations, reliable follow through, structures that reduce uncertainty. When people know what they're walking into, they feel they can let their shoulders down and they can fully participate. And they can show up a little bit better for the moments that are uncertain. Those will happen naturally. So we reduce uncertainty where we can, so we make room for uncertainty where it's mandatory. There's proximity. So leaders have to take the time, we have to take the time to listen directly to the people closest to the work. And when you create that closeness, that connection, that stopping, that noticing, that how are you, that I remember your kid's name, or I remember that you were just out on vacation and I'm going to ask you where you went. These small things that make it really clear I'm paying attention to you, you matter to me. And then the third is power sharing, inviting people to shape decisions, not just react to them. So we can't just ask people for perfection. We have to include them in the structure of the system. If we can hold those three things, I think it's a practice that helps us cultivate deeper belonging. And then I'll just say one more thing. I think there's three other sort of solid moves that we can really make that are tough to do, but that also really bring belonging into a culture as a mandate. One's letting go of being the sole problem solver. And that's for all of us. That's from the boss to the employee to the neighbor to the husband to the wife to the mother to the father to the son, right? Like letting go of being the sole problem solver, sharing in that. It's naming tensions instead of constantly smoothing them over. So belonging is not everyone's happy all the time. So it's naming when things aren't going well so that people aren't walking out of the room and then, going to the water cooler and just chatting about it. And then it's creating systems where disagreement is also safe. And then the most important thing, it's also expected. So that in moments of disagreement, it doesn't feel like a disruption to the belonging. It's actually just part of how we do a relationship here because it's safe. Because all those other things we were talking about before happen, because it's predictable, because I have proximity to the person in charge, to the leader, because there's power sharing, right? Because I'm part of the decision, it makes the moments of tension feel less heavy.
Thanks, Brandon. I want to move now a little bit to kind of the family unit, the family structure, right? So we've talked about workplace, we've talked a little bit about school, we've talked about leadership practices. Now we also have to form that sense of belonging in our families and with families, right? And other families and our systems and that relationship. Because we recognize that at Harmony, like that's really important. I'm about to tell you a little bit about our new Harmony at Home app. Denise is about to tell you a little bit about it in a second too. So I really want to thank Denise as that district leader in Clark County who's your goal was family engagement, like family connection, right? Both with the district and helping family units feel connected. How did you work with families to help them build that sense of belonging within the district itself, but then also kind of help them continue to build relationships with one another in their systems, given all the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, for sure. The co-creation means designing with the families, not for them. And that's something that is lived experiences. Both Terrell and Brandon have talked about those lived experiences and how important they are. And it's just as important to recognize and value the assets that our families bring to the table. So often they're recognized as another thing, versus an asset, and that they can help and assist us. But nobody takes the time to talk to them and find out what it is, what value add they can have. They may not be engaging for a variety of reasons. It could be education, it could be cultural, it could be not knowing how. And so there is some disengagement that happens, but it's because I don't know how to engage. So it's taking the time to do that with our families. There's so much strength in the partnerships that we create in the community. So one of the things that we've done in Clark County is that we've taken our families and our community partners and brought them into the same spaces so they can co-create and plan. And we've built that family efficacy and the power of family through those partnerships. Our families now in Clark County, instead of being the ones who sit in an audience and get information, they are now the ones that are in the forefront, and they are teaching workshop sessions to district leaders and community partners and other parents. So they are seen, valued, and heard through that opportunity to be a leader in their community. And not often do we see that. Earlier, you were talking about I was thinking about love language, and I was thinking we need almost like belonging language, because like, what does belonging mean to you, and what makes you feel like you belong? What does that sound like, feel like, to a family, to each individual? And I also, when we were talking about bumps in the road, I was thinking, I feel like we are snow plowers. Like, we're just trying to smooth the path, but I'm not taking every bump out, because we learn and grow in that uncomfortable space. And so even our families need that space of uncomfortability so that they can grow and learn as well. We in Clark County were very fortunate to pilot Harmony at Home, which Dr. Yoder will talk about a little bit, but we started with the content with our parents initially, just like classroom teachers would. And what we saw was that there was a need for Harmony at Home, where we have common language between school and home. So now our students are going to school, they're getting all the healthy relationship, whole child, whole family approach, sense of belonging, sense of safety, communication, relationships. All of those things are happening in our schools, but then what's happening at home? And so being able to intentionally prepare our parents to engage with their students on, let's talk about it, and how do I do that? Our families would come to us and say, I don't know how to get my child to talk. They come home from school and I ask them, how was school? And they say, fine. and nothing else happens, so how do I get to the real, like what might be happening inside my child's head, and how can I help them? So through our partnership with Harmony Academies, we were able to provide our families that structure, to understand how important it is to talk to our children, and give them the opportunity to talk about emotions and how they manage them and what healthy relationships look like. And that modeling is made huge gains in our district, and we embed it everywhere. It's not just a single single add-on or in a single place. We do it not just in our family engagement centers, we're doing it in our schools, our counselors, our MTSS, our wraparound services team. Every event we open with a connection card. We do sessions, and we have our programs in those sessions that are focused on senses of belonging and relationship building, and how do we build family efficacy. So I think it's important for us to remember that our parents are not part of the problem, they are part of our solutions. And so when we bring our parents on board and our families on board, we will see a change and a shift in attendance and the sense of belonging, and our students feeling more welcomed at school. And that's how it starts. It's in that powerful collaboration and that shared vision for what we want to accomplish.
Thanks. And Terrell, your stories about your grandma are some of my favorite stories that you tell. So can you tell me a little bit about what the science says about creating belonging within family units?
All right, tearjerker
I
time.
thought you'd like that transition.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and especially within families and building on what I've already shared, we think about if belonging is about consistency or predictability or reliability, right? These words represent, and I loved Denise, your idea of like getting people to share the words they associate with belonging. You're exactly right, Nick. When I think about places where I felt completely secure, safe, to be myself just the way I am, not to pretend, no mask, there were many moments that I share with my grandma when she was alive where, you know, she, I built a relationship with her. I mean, she was my mom's mom, right? But she knew me. My name is Terrell. My grandmother never called me Terrell. She called me Rell, Rell. And that she's a Southern grandma, so she had a draw to it, and I could hear it, and I knew that was my grandma. Secondly, she made time for me. We would sit at her kitchen table every night, and she would give me vanilla wafers and ice cream. And I remember one day, my grandma had her vanilla wafers and ice cream with coffee. And I remember one day I said, "Man, I want to try coffee." My grandma said, "No, you can't drink coffee. It's going to stunt your growth." But one day, my grandma let me sip her coffee. And I can't tell you like the significance of that for me, that my grandma allowed me to experience her world. We got there gradually, right? But it came to know some things I could expect. So to Brandon's point earlier, like I knew when I spent every summer with my grandma, I don't know if it was a Monday, if it was a Tuesday or Wednesday, we might have had choir rehearsal, we might have gone to Piggly Wiggly, the little grocery store, but I know how the night is going to end. It's going to always end with vanilla wafers and ice cream. And so even to this day, get choked up thinking about it. When I have vanilla wafers, which is why I don't do it. When I have vanilla wafers and ice cream, it just transports me back to that moment with my grandma. My grandma would make breakfast. As she got older, she started taking us to breakfast. She would take us to Hardee's. And a couple of years ago, I was with a friend. And I was like, "Don't take me to Hardee's," because every time I go to Hardee's, I think of my grandma. My friend took me to Hardee's. The moment I got there, I thought of it. Why? Because there was there was like consistency to certain patterns. I knew what to expect of my day, how my day would start, how my day would end. That transports to the classroom, which is why using the kinds of tools we've been talking about in the classroom to make the class, this is the thing that every single educator who's in the room or will listen later needs to understand. For some students, the classroom is terrifying. It is scary. It's a place of people will judge me, not just the teacher. Like, will I have friends? If I say this, will people judge me as smart or will they judge me as silly? Do I have the right answer? Does it make sense? Is my accent too strong? Are my hand movements too much? All these thoughts are in their head. So if we can do anything to create that space where in this classroom, everyone can move, can ask questions, can be assured that when I was an elementary school teacher, my classroom, my students we were the Eagles. So like I started this tradition and tell them like everybody in this classroom is an Eagle. Doesn't matter if you're a big Eagle, small Eagle, broad Eagle, fun size Eagle, everybody's an Eagle, right? And if we could build that community kind of connection spirit where everyone's a part regardless of ability, disability, those become the same kind of principles, core components that, make families stay together, that make classrooms stay together. They bring teams together. So to button it up, for me, I think it's all about the same as you've been talking about: consistency, dependability. I knew my grandma, I could trust her. I could tell her my secrets. She would listen. I could tell my grandma stuff that she wouldn't tell my mom. And that works in families, but it works in all of these other settings too. Who's the person? Someone put it in the chat. Check on your people. One of my colleagues always says, check on your strong people, because there are people who often check on others, but who checks on the one who often checks on others? And sometimes that's the supervisor, sometimes that's the CEO, the CFO, the teacher, the principal, the superintendent. So we do need to create spaces. Like my grandma, when she was alive, would ask me sometimes, like, "Well, how you doing, baby? Just check in on me." And I could share with her when I was doing well, when I was not doing well. I think routine, predictability, connection, consistency, dependability, trust, and then lastly, tradition. They're just things my grandma did with me that, like, and I won't do this one, but like my grandma was a singer. I'm a singer. And me and my grandma sang a lot in the kitchen. And I don't do that with everybody, but through the singing, quite frankly, of gospel hymns, me and grandma created strong bonds. So when she leaves this earth and I preached her eulogy, I sang at her funeral. But it was at that opportunity one last time. In fact, when my grandma takes her last breath, me and her are singing. So, there's this connection that comes through traditions, things that we share together: song, music, art, history. And I wonder how we are using that in work settings, school settings, and home settings to build those kind of connections that foster belonging. I'll stop there, tagging my friends.
Thanks, Terrell. So that was a great, nice wrap up, because I need to talk a little bit about the Harmony at Home. So one, I want to app about the next services, or what everyone's going to receive. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions in the chat and the Q&A, but I really appreciate it. We'll make sure to send those to the speakers, and hopefully maybe they'll give their information and we can get those answers to you all. So I just really want to quickly tell you about the Harmony at Home app. So one, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Terrell. Thank you, Denise, for speaking. I really, really appreciate you all. So I know you can't see everybody else, so I'm going to give a round of applause for everybody else. There was one speaker in the Q&A though that says you all are rock stars, and you're all on fire with your words. So you all are much, much appreciated in the work that you're doing. And if you want to answer any of those questions in the chat while I talk about Harmony at Home, I'd appreciate it. So Harmony at Home app. It was just launched, back in the fall. What it is we have, as I mentioned, Harmony has these everyday practices, and explicit skill instruction. That's what that app brings, right? It allows families to set goals with one another, allows them to express gratitude with one another. It allows them to kind of really think about checking in on their emotions and setting daily intentions, but it also gives quick activities that they can do, quick conversation prompts that you can have. Animated storybooks for the young kids that allow them to engage and think about it and have discussions with their family. So it has an in-app journal, which you can share not only with the family unit here, but like you can share it with your grandparents or uncles and aunts that are further away. So it allows for conversations around those relationships moving forward. So it has a ton to offer. You go to the next slide, and we are super excited to offer it at no cost for the next year. You go to the next slide, Heather. For the next year, to sign up. So all you do is scan that QR code, and register as an NU student or NU alumni, and you get access to this app for the next year, either on Apple Store or Google Play, and you'll kind of create your account with your registered credentials. So again, scan that QR code, download the Harmony at Home app. I'll give you like 30 seconds before I pass it over to Nancy so you can scan that QR code. But really, it allows kind of families to really engage with one another. So I really hope you all take advantage of it. Obviously, the recording will have the instructions of how to download this as well. Once again, thank you so much to our speakers. You are rock stars, and always enjoy the conversation with you all. So thank you again so much. Nancy, I'm passing it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much. And that was such an interesting discussion. Thank you, Nick, and all of our panelists. I think our participants would have loved to have had more time, so we may have to have a part two. We truly appreciate this wonderful gesture that Harmony at Home will be available for students and alumni, because whether you have young children or grandchildren or siblings, it's a wonderful opportunity for people to access really, tested materials that could really make a difference with the children that are participating. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. National University Speaker Series over the last few years, we have not featured the Harmony program, so we're really glad to be doing so, and really hope that people will take advantage of this opportunity. Again, this is going to be recorded, so if anybody feels like they missed part of it, and I know some of our participants have reached out to say, I have some questions that need to be answered. I'm sorry we didn't have a chance for Q&A, but we hopefully will have, you can have some contact and run that through either Nick or Amanda if there's questions that you want to reach out to our panelists today. A few things that I want to share with you from upcoming events for National University. One, we have a session on Scholarship Publishing 101. A lot of our graduate and doctoral students are interested in publishing. That's coming up this Thursday. This Saturday, we're very happy to involve our community in a day of service with Courage to Call. Alumni Association meeting next week. We have our monthly Navigator networking, and then we invite anyone on the call, whether staff, faculty, students, alumni, friends of the university, to participate in the San Diego Holiday Bowl Parade. And then we'll soon be making an announcement on our January speaker series, but just like to thank everyone for their time. Like to thank the National University team with Heather and Lindsay for coordinating everything for the speaker series, and certainly hats off to our friends that support our Harmony program. It is something that truly adds value to the entire National University community. So thank you so much. And there's that QR code once again. Appreciate your time.